Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. I'm a doula in Washoe County, Nevada, a Medicaid provider, a lactation educator, childbirth educator, and mom of 18. You can find me and connect on doulainreno.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell, and today I'm here with Suzanne Culberg. How are you?
I am fabulous. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're from Australia, and I always, in the US, when you have an accent, we're like, oh my gosh, it's so sexy to have that accent. But I have the accent too. I think we forget about that.
I went to the States for the first time last year, and everywhere I went, the first thing people would say would be like, "You have an accent." And I was like, "Actually, no, you have an accent." And then we would laugh.
Exactly. So that's what we talked a little bit before, and I have a best friend that lives in Australia, and I'm like, which one of us is sexier because we both have an accent? But thank you for joining us. I want you to jump in and share your parenting journey with us.
Oh, so I'm going to say something that might surprise people, but I didn't always want to be a parent. Like, there's some people, my daughter's one of them, who just know they want to be a mum. They can't wait. Like, my daughter's got planned her 5 kids. She's named them already. She's just like one of these people who's born, I'm going to be a mum. And I love that for her. That wasn't for me. So basically, and I think a lot of this stems back to my own mother. She's passed now. Love her dearly. But when she became a mum, that was it. And there's nothing wrong if that's your life desire,
Mhm.
but that wasn't ever mine. And I thought, oh, why would I want to become a mum? Because once you become a mum, you have no friends, you have no hobbies, and everything becomes about your kids. Because that was the experience that I had. My
Yeah.
mum didn't have any friends all the way through to her passing. Like, she had acquaintances, she wasn't a hermit, but she never did anything for herself. And I thought that's what happened. You became a mum and everything becomes about your kids. And for some people, that's what they desire. But for other people, I think it's just been what's modeled to them. So basically, I met my husband when I was quite young. I was 18, he was 24, and we were together for years. And then in my family, we have a history of early menopause. So
Mm.
I knew that if we wanted to have kids, it's something we'd need to consider before I turned 30. So basically, we were like, I'll get to 28, then we'll discuss it again. So anyway, we're together 10 years. I turned 28. We kind of got a little bit clucky. I was like, oh, what is this feeling? Like, people have babies and they're cute and I want one. And anyway, we're like, okay, we'll have kids. And I was so fortunate that I got pregnant the first month. Came off the
Yeah.
pill, was pregnant. And I know not many people have that experience, but to me, that was kind of a shell shock too. So remember the stick turning blue and kind of crying. And my husband was like, but we wanted this. And I was like, I thought this would take 6 months and then maybe we would be like, hmm. And so in that aspect, I was so fortunate, blessed, pregnant first month. Pregnancy was amazing. Birth, that was not an experience that was pleasant, my first birth. My second one was beautiful and healing and amazing. But the thing that I really struggled with, the birth, I didn't get the birth I wanted. It
Mm.
was a 5-day failed induction, emergency cesarean, that was a very difficult to recover from. But I was like, no matter what, I'm going to breastfeed. Like, didn't get the birth I want, I'm going to breastfeed. That didn't happen either. And like, when I'd done the classes and all the educating, and people said so only less than 1% of people can't breastfeed and all this sort of stuff, it wasn't something I was prepared for. So that was really, really challenging. And I was determined I was going to do this. And I remember sitting in the child health nurse's office when my daughter was 9 days old. She'd never done a number two, except that first meconium. She still had crystals. She was screaming, and the child health nurse saying to me, "Has your baby ever looked like that?" And pointing at the posters. You know how all around the office they have posters of sleeping babies and whatever?
Yeah.
And I was like, not once. And she was like, what would be the harm in supplementing her a bit more? Because I was seeing a lactation consultant, we were giving her a little bit of formula, but she was like, no more, only 20 mils, like 1 tablespoon, no more. And she was like, what would be the harm in just giving her a little bit more, just so she can sleep? I swear that woman saved my child's life
Mm.
because I wouldn't have kept, anyway. So that was challenging, and it was just something, and I wanted to share for people who are listening. don't make yourself a stat. Like, if less than 1% of people can't do this, I'm determined and all this sort of stuff. Because I still remember sitting there and she's like, how's everything going? I'm like, everything's great. She's like, your shirt's inside out. Not as a judgment, but I was just so tired. I couldn't drive because of the birth. So my mum fortunately came to visit and helped out. But yeah, my shirt was inside out. I don't know the last time I'd slept or eaten myself. And it was just, there was so much shame for me in not being able to do this. But just that one sentence, what would be the harm of giving her a little bit more and having her sleep, I swear, changed both of our lives.
Yeah. Tell me about the induction. What was the reason for the induction? And then 5 days, I mean, we always say here, because I'm a doula, 48 to 72 hours. Like inductions are and should be like you're forcing your body to do something it's not ready to do. It's a lot harder on your body. And I try to really, I have a completely separate visit if induction is on the table because it's a different animal. Like you, that pretty birth plan that you had initially, we're gonna probably have like it's not gonna it doesn't work the same. And I don't want people beating themselves up like I wanted this unmedicated birth and doing everything natural and then I ended up with an epidural. Well, I mean, holy crap, induction is so hard on your body. Again, just like breastfeeding. I don't want women to be so hard on themselves like they failed something because they didn't do it the way they wanted to in a completely different situation. So why were you being induced and why did they let it go 5 days?
So what was funny, not funny, I I lived in a small town and we had a small town hospital, and that was where I was planning to deliver.
Okay.
When my pregnancy started getting complicated towards the end, I was changed to a different hospital because of the facilities, which makes sense. The hospital I was at wouldn't have been able to do a cesarean. Um, I had signs of preeclampsia, I had high blood pressure, I had protein in the urine, and that was escalating
Mm,
quickly. And I
preeclampsia.
remember asking, can I just have a cesarean? Because like I never wanted one, but I don't know if you have a gut feeling or whatever. And here they were like, no, no, what we'll do is an 8 hour trial of labor. And then if it doesn't go through, we'll give you the cesarean. And I thought, okay, I can do that, like, 8 hours. But then staff changes and different people, like I
Mm.
went through, I don't know how many shifts because of how long
Oh,
this took.
10? I mean, we do 12-hour shifts here. So in 5 days, you went through 10 or 11 shift changes if it's a 12-hour block. That's
And
nuts.
every time somebody came on, they made a different call and made a
Right.
different decision. Like I still remember them trying to break my waters, and the first person wasn't able to do it. And Twilight was a big movie back then because my daughter's now 12. And I was like, am I giving birth to Renesmee? And she just gave me a blank look because she didn't know what I was talking about. But then trying to put that hook up there, and and
Yeah.
and I think I had four people attempted in the end. And with the fourth person, when they finally got it, I didn't know they'd got it. And I went to the bathroom and there was big gush, which surprised me. And I remember like, can I have a broom? Like I was panicked about it and I wanted to clean it up. And I remember her rolling her eyes going, you're not gonna be one of those, are you? Like, and I was just thinking, I think people forget what that person's been through. You've had, I don't know how many people touching you in your regions that people haven't, especially with your first kid, you're not used to this. Sticking a
Yeah.
giant hook up there. And it's very confronting.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so yeah, it was a long haul. And in the end I ended up with a rip-roaring infection. No
Of
surprise because of how
course.
long this
Oh
took.
my gosh.
And then even with that, somebody came along. There was no communication in this hospital because someone came along, took my IV out, and off they went. The next person come and said, well, where am I going to put your antibiotics now? Put another one in. Just nobody spoke to each other. I think that was
Right.
the main problem with this place.
Hmm. Well, I mean, even like we have OB/GYN groups, right? So the doctor that's delivering and you get whoever's on call when you come in. So even if you've seen the same person the whole time through your pregnancy, you're getting the dude that's on call, the person, whoever it is. And even in the same group, I can understand doctors having a difference of opinion. There's lots of science out there. When did they get trained? How up to date are they on information? And there's a different vibe with each doctor. But in the same practice, like you'd think that they'd have some sort of standard or something. And no, it's the same thing here. You know, our doctors are on call for 24 hours and nurses are 12. So if you're running that shift where a new OB comes in, totally new vibe. completely different set of this is what we're going to do. But 5 days, like talk about no communication. That is ridiculous. I can't believe you even allowed, although this is a good time to mention this, 4 people tried to break your water. That was 4 internal exams, one right after the other, putting a little crochet hook thing to break your, like, it's not a little thing to have a cervical exam during labor and four, one right after the other. Can't believe you didn't donkey kick one of them. Like, we're done. But when you're the woman in labor, especially your first time, you're afraid to speak up and say anything because these people must know what they're talking about.
Well, you don't know that you can say no. And like I
Yeah.
have a podcast called The Nope Coach, and I actually had a doula on my show, and we did a whole episode about how you can say no in the birth room.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was funny, like I didn't know any of these things. I didn't even know what a doula was before I had my first kid. I remember I was
Right.
pregnant, and one of my friends was like, I've got a doula. I was like, what's that? And then my first thought was, why would you want one of those? Because I had no frame of reference.
Right.
After I had my first kid, when I was pregnant the second time, I told my husband, then I was Googling doulas in my
Yeah.
area. I was like, I'm not going through this again. I'm having
Right.
somebody to speak for me who knows me, who's there. Then there was a whole other thing because I ended up with a second cesarean, and in here, at least the hospital I went to, you could only have one person in the room, so they weren't actually allowed to attend. But the pre-birth work that we did in the post-birth support, like those couple of visits, life-changing.
Right. And you don't know. You don't, I mean, when you're pregnant the first time, you don't even know what questions to ask. I have this like 50 questions to ask your OB, or if you're doing a labor and delivery tour of the hospital or midwife. And some of them are like where to park. That has nothing to do with being a doula or your birth. But I mean, I have all these questions, and some of them I tell people, some of them may seem ridiculous, but if you don't even know to ask the question, it's on here because I want you to think, oh, I didn't even think to ask that question. You should. You need to
But
ask
where
these
to
questions.
park, it sounds so nascent and whatever, but because we changed hospital at the last minute, we
Yeah,
didn't know. So, like, I was there, they transported me by ambulance. They were like, these stats aren't good. This baby needs to come out. We will transport. And then my husband brought the car. He didn't know where to park.
right,
And then
right,
it was
right,
5 days, so there was nowhere for him to stay. So he was traveling forward and back. And the fact that he didn't have an accident, because, he was so tired and
right.
they're like, you can't stay and all this sort of thing. So where to park. And also, different things like my first hospital, the way they had the music set up, like we were back in iPod days back then with a docking
Yeah,
station, and then the next place didn't have that birth ball, all these things. So I
right.
didn't have any of the things that I planned because I wasn't planning to go there.
Right. Which is so, I mean, that's different. I think you really have to look at how many hospitals are there. I know how many, I know all of them. I know who offers what and what the pros and cons are of each location. But I think they've also, like that stuff, they all have birth balls. They all have peanut balls. They all have, like,
Not where I was. So it
yeah,
was amazing that the bigger hospital actually had a lot less. And then, yeah, so there's that to consider as well. But as you said, you don't know. And then after the water's finally broken, they wanted to put a tracing wire, like
yep.
on to measure on the. I didn't know anything about that. And once again, that took a couple of goes. It fell out a couple of times. So I was like, no wonder I had an infection. Do you know how many people had their hand up me in that 5 day period?
Not a surprise. Now, did you have to get treated for preeclampsia? Because you said protein in your urine and high blood pressure, which are
Yes,
two
so they put me on blood
magnesium.
pressure medicine
Okay.
and
Okay.
magnesium. And it was funny because they didn't stop the blood pressure medicine after I delivered, but when preeclampsia, that stopped. So then when I finally managed to get out of bed, then I fainted straight away because my blood pressure bottomed out. So
Oh my gosh. After a C-section, after five
I,
days of labor, I mean, your body
yes.
had to have felt like it was hit by a Mack truck.
It was funny, not funny now, but when I finally got home and everything, it was literally 6 weeks before I could be in the kitchen, like before I could even make toast or whatever. I was that run over. And then when I had my son, because that was my experience the first time, I was like, I ended up with an elective cesarean. There's a whole thing behind that. But I was like, I remember coming home from the hospital and like making dinner that night, like the whole experience, because it was planned. I hadn't had that 5 day rip roaring pool, yeah, yank, whatever. Yes, it was a big surgery. Yes, that was a thing, but the experience was totally different because I didn't have to go through all that first. So I didn't really realize how that front end took, how much it took out of my body.
Well, and just, yeah, I mean, also preeclampsia, magnesium makes you feel absolutely terrible, like you have the flu. So you're going through that at the same time. And then your body fighting infection and being on antibiotics. Like, there was there was so much happening there. The other thing I think is interesting in the US, I have a friend who's a physical therapist, and there I think that's similar where you are. I know I'm always talking with my friend about what we call people differently, but basically to help you after surgery. She ended up with an emergency C-section, and so she said to her nurse, "When's my physical therapist going to come and help me? Because if you get surgery on your foot, anything here in the US, there's a physical therapist that comes and helps you post surgery." And the postpartum nurse goes, "Oh, we don't do that here." Like
Yeah.
it's the number one most done major abdominal surgery in the US, and there's no support for women postpartum for physical therapy or anything. So that just adds insult to injury where you're already going through all this and then, oh, by the way, this is a major abdominal surgery, but we don't have anything to help you. And so that's the most ridiculous thing
It was the same
ever.
here. And also, because I've
Oh,
had a number of surgeries for different things over the time. And as you said, physical therapist is assigned or recommended. Not only that, but once you've had a baby, you have a baby to pick up. Like,
oh, by the
obviously,
way.
so it's kind of like with physical therapy, normally for other surgeries, don't lift anything, don't do this, don't do that. It's like, well, what am I supposed to say? Sorry, kid. Just you got nappies to change, you've got to bath, you've got things to do,
Yeah.
which more than ever needs the guidelines of how best to do this, especially like my first baby was quite large. When I had my second baby, he was like over 30% smaller. I had a nearly 10 pounder and then a 6 pounder. And I was like, where's the
Wow.
rest of it?
I mean, that's hard on your body too. That's a 4 pound difference. And you converted. You converted right to pounds. That was great. I love
We weigh our babies in pounds. Isn't that the weirdest thing? Because like I remember writing a book and my editor
what?
was from the US and she was like, "Why don't you have consistency?" And I was like, "Yeah, in Australia, when a baby's born, they're this many pounds. And it's the only time ever. Everything else is kilos,
Do you do centimeters for length?
centimeters for length.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you don't you just
it's
pounds.
weird.
Just that. Okay.
And then we have no
Um,
frame of reference because we don't use pounds. So we're like trying to convert it. I remember my daughter, I was like, okay, she's 9 pounds, whatever. So she's like basically 4.6 kilos. Yeah, she's decent.
yeah. You know what else is interesting? We weigh them in kilos here, and then the nurse converts it to pounds. How stupid. We're so stupid. We're all so stupid. Anyway, tell me about how long was it from between your two kids?
Not quite 2 years.
Okay,
So
so
they are 23 months apart.
yeah, which is natural child spacing, and you guys didn't even get to practice having babies because you got pregnant so fast, which I mean, there's
We
pros.
with the second one, we weren't even planning. He was like, surprise. And it was just kind of funny. I remember going to the doctor and they're like, well, what were you using for contraception? I was like, well, nothing. But well, you were planning then, weren't you? And I was like, well, anyway. But it was just like one time, surprise. And I was like, well, it was meant to be. But also it was a gift because I honestly don't think I would have had a second child but planned because the first
Mm.
experience was so traumatic. I was like, I can't do this again. I remember his pregnancy, I cried every night.
No.
And when we went in for the delivery, I was just a mess. And I actually hired a private obstetrician because I was like, I'm not going through whatever that was again. Um, and it cost a lot of money, but I was like, I don't care. And the whole
Yeah.
experience was different. And the appointment before my delivery, I remember going to see him like for the final one because we had a set date and time and everything. And I just fell apart in his rooms. He didn't hurry me out. He didn't rush me out. He stayed with me for I don't know how long. And when I came out, I remember seeing all the pregnant women. There was no seats left. Like people were literally standing. I was in there that long. And he's like, don't you feel bad for them? They can wait. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
Oh. We need more of that. We definitely need more of that. I think even, well, there's so many differences when you decide I don't want to try to labor again. I just want to have a C-section. And I have clients like that that's planned C-section. And I as
No,
a
I wanted
doula,
to try and labor again, but my son wasn't in a good position. He was
oh,
not breech, but sideways.
transverse.
Um, transverse, that's it. And he had the cord around his neck. So they said if you do labor, and especially because your daughter didn't really descend, we don't want to risk that. So we strongly advise a cesarean. And
Okay.
I was disappointed. But it was so weird that I wanted to labor again, but
I,
I really wanted that
I'm
experience of
proud of
delivering a
you
baby.
wanting it. I'm like so proud of you wanting that. Regardless, when you plan one, the medication that they use in the spinal is different and it's better with planned induction here anyway.
I actually
So,
had a worse experience. I had a reaction to what they used the second time.
oh,
Whatever they
okay.
put in the spinal, I think they call it, I don't know, there's a name for it, but basically I got really hot. So I had to bring in all these
Okay.
ice packs, and I felt like my head was being hit with an axe. I can still
Oh.
remember screaming about my head, and I wasn't quiet because, like, the next day, the couple of midwives who were around or whatever, like, "Oh, Suzanne, how's your head?" And I was like, "Oh man, I must have been bad." But then they gave me something to cure that, which made me go off the wall. Like, so I was like, troppo, and I was pulling the blanket back, trying to get out of the bed. I was like, I want to go home. I don't want to do this. And my husband's like, we're a bit committed now. I can still remember it because I was like, let's go. This is not happening. No, I'm not doing this. But once that had settled, the experience was great. But yeah, whatever they gave me there did not
Okay.
agree with me
Because
whatsoever.
usually, when they give a spinal compared to an epidural, it is a different medication and it has better coverage as far as the experience of actually going through the surgery and being awake, but
Oh
not
yeah,
so.
that part of it was great. Like once
Okay,
they
okay.
settled it, but it was so funny because I reacted to it and they said, how many few percentage of people have this happen. But yeah, I can still remember, as I said, screaming about my head and lots of people going, "How's your head, Suzanne?" So I was like, "Oh God, I was loud."
It's funny. You're like only 1% of people, challenge accepted. I'll be that. I'm gonna do that in every category of labor and delivery.
Well, I
Um,
did that too. I didn't tell you with my epidural with my daughter. Something went wrong with that. I can't remember, and they had to change that out twice. And they're like, "This never
oh,
happens." And I had to not move at all. Um,
yes.
something snapped at something rather, and they had to bring in like the senior whatever. And so they were like, "This." And the other thing too, because I'm allergic to a lot of things or sensitive, whatever medicine they gave me in my first delivery, it made me feel like there was things crawling under my skin. Like,
Oh yeah.
I had that reaction, and it was not pleasant. Um, so yeah, like
Wow. Wow. I'm glad. I love that you said I wasn't sure I wanted to have kids. Then you're like, I wouldn't have had a second one if it hadn't been a surprise. Because we don't always admit that, right? It isn't about the child that you love. It's about not wanting to go through the experience to get the child that you love.
Oh,
Most,
100%. If we could
right?
have afforded a surrogate or whatever, totally. But like I didn't know if I could do that again.
Yeah.
And the second time was very different. I got hand, foot, and mouth in my first trimester. I had three threatened miscarriages. I had preterm labor that had to be stopped. My second pregnancy was horrific. I spent more time, I think, in hospital than out. And it was very, very challenging and totally worth it. And I love my son more than anything. But
Right.
when you're going through it, and also too, because the second time I already had a toddler at home. Like at least when my first pregnancy things went to shit, it was just me. But
Right.
now I'm trying to balance my daughter and her care. My husband was actually working fly in, fly out. So it was literally just me. And I was also working. It's a lot. And you look back at it, you're like, how did I do that? Because I had to. But
They're 12 and 10 now. Did you try to breastfeed again with your son?
yes, because a lot of people had said because my first labor was so many drugs, so many reactions, so many things, perhaps what the issue was the milk never came in because of all that intervention.
Yeah.
So with my second child, I tried, though I did word the hospital up that I'd struggled the first time, so they had stuff on hand. Wasn't able to feed the second time either. So don't know what it is. But it was a much smoother thing. But also because he was so little, like only
Yeah.
6 pounds and whatever, he couldn't afford to lose any weight. So they were a lot more supportive of supplementing him and stuff as well. He was also
I
jaundiced and had to go under a little light for a couple of days and that. So yeah.
Right. You also, I think when you decide you want to breastfeed and you don't expect, I don't know, half my clients are nervous that it won't work, but they really want to. I have some clients that are like, yeah, I'm gonna do half and half. I'll breastfeed, but I'll formula feed. And then they're like pro breastfeeders. They could pump for an entire country, and I'm like, holy crap. And they're like, yeah, I want a formula feed, but I just have so much milk and it's so easy. Like there's no rhyme and reason to it, but really most people, women who say to me, well, I'm nervous that I won't be able to. I'm like, that's such a low percentage. I understand that fear. I still want to try. And what would be the worst case scenario? Right? But you never got to have that conversation. But the second time you were prepared.
Yeah, so the first time I tried for 3 months, like, I was determined. I never quit things. And the second time, By the time he was 5 weeks old and it wasn't really happening, I was like, let's just fully formula feed him because it's, especially when you've got two, you've got another one at home to look after as well.
Yeah.
I didn't have as much time to commit to it as I did the first time. And it was like, if this was going to happen, it would have happened by now. But also, too, when I did quit both times, I never had any issues with engorgement. I never changed a
Mm.
cup size in either pregnancy. I never had any changes to my breast whatsoever. So, yeah.
That's nuts. Tell me about your son and well, a couple things, two things, and you can go in, you can do it whatever you want. I love your business and I want to talk about that because that happened as a result of having kids. I don't know what you did before that, but I know what you're doing now, and it's really remarkable. And the other thing is your son had a diagnosis. So I don't know which came first and where you want to go with that, but if you could jump in on those things, that would be great.
So he's autism spectrum
Hmm.
diagnosis or
Hmm.
something else. So yeah, my son, he struggled with a lot of things. But the other thing is my daughter is gifted. So she's going to a selective school. She starts high school next year. She's going early and she's going to one that's based on gifting. So a number of times I mentioned to healthcare professionals and everything, I think my son is struggling. And they're like, no, no, your daughter's just gifted. Like he's regular. You know? And when he was 4, we moved here to Sydney. We had been living in another place, and I put him into the preschool. They start school here at 5 or
Okay.
6
Yep.
anyway. And then my daughter was at school at that stage, and the preschool rang me like his second or third week, and I could hear the person, when someone wants to have something that might be a challenging conversation, and she was like, Suzanne, I've been observing Casimir, and I think he might have some areas that he's struggling. And
Mm.
I was like, oh, thank God. And she was like, pardon? I've never had one of these conversations go this way. And I was like, I've been trying to advocate for him for years, but everyone kept telling me that I was over the top, I have a gifted daughter, whatever. So anyway, we took him to get assessed, and terms like ADD, Asperger's, they're thrown
Hmm.
around so much now, but the actual official diagnosis takes years. So like first we had to see a pediatrician, and then what happened was the pediatrician wasn't quite sure, so she's like, would you be open for me coming to watch him in his environment? Like, so I'll arrange with the daycare and then I'll come and watch, and he won't know. He ended up seeing her. It was so funny. The kid is whip smart. And that's why so many people didn't think he was on the spectrum. He can make eye contact and whatever, but it's a spectrum. People struggle in
Yeah.
different areas.
Yep.
And anyway, the distrust then after he knew he was being observed was incredible. But anyway, from there
Interesting.
we had so many assessments,
Yeah.
and eventually we went into the Westmead Children's Hospital here, and they do a day where he spends time with different people and does different activities, and they assess every single area. And so for in terms of like comprehension and ability to understand and stuff, he was actually 2 years ahead. But when it comes to things like but being able to do up buttons or shoelaces or anything with fine motor, or I can't remember how they explain it, but he was actually only showing up as 4 when he was
Yeah.
6.
Yep.
So like that's where the area is, and that's why I think it's so funny because people are so dismissive. Oh, he can make eye contact. He's not on the spectrum. But and then we managed to get some OT support, some speech therapy support. He still sees now a psychotherapist, and it has been amazing. Just these little tweaks and things that they've brought in because he's overly self-critical. And if he can't do something, he's got no interest in trying. So things like handwriting or reading, he just had no frame of reference for it. And then when he saw the OT was giving him a pencil grip to hold this way, the speech therapist was giving him a pencil grip to hold that way, and the teacher in the classroom. So sometimes you don't realize. So you have to still be really advocating in there to say, okay, the goal is to get him to write. Can we all get on the same page here?
Mhm.
So, um, but the supports that were in place, but also it's time consuming to go to all these different appointments to sit and listen to what's the best thing. But it's totally worth it. I have a different kid now because originally they were like, I think he'll have to go to a like a special school. I have a name for it. I can't think of it, but not regular school. But he's been in mainstream school now. He's heading into grade 4 next year. He has areas where he does struggle. And also socially, he has no frame of reference for anything besides him. Like if he's interested, he's there. But if you're like, oh, let's talk about this, and he's got no thing, he'll just walk off. He's not rude. He's just wired differently.
I have a son who's autistic. He's 25 now, and I adopted him when he was 2. And again, like 20 something years ago, they weren't talking a lot about it. And so I knew something was very off. Like, something's not right. Easiest kid to potty train, absolutely hands down, easiest kid to potty train in like 5 seconds. It was done. But in all these other ways, you're trying to figure out, and he's in an adult independent living situation now where they monitor him, but he can live on his own and does pretty well. But also, I mean, you said he's not being rude. Like, my son was rude all the time. Like, it's absolutely rude because the way he thinks about things, that's his normal, that's his reality. It's not.
Yes, that's
It,
that's the thing. It comes across though as rude if
yeah.
you
Oh
don't know.
yeah.
And I'm like, and trying to explain to my late mother, I'm like, he doesn't have a frame of reference.
They
It's
don't even
like,
care. It's like they don't even have the
yeah,
they
he
don't take the
doesn't
time
have
for
that
that.
part to understand that, and a lot of the work he's still doing with the psychotherapist is like, if people ask about you, now you ask about them. Like this reciprocity, this is not naturally occurring to him. And
Nope.
then if he's had enough, he'll just leave.
Right.
And
Yep.
it's just kind of like it makes total
Socially,
sense to him.
right. And it doesn't. I mean, and some of it, it's like this, you just have to do this because other people expect it and they see you as being rude, even though you don't get it. Like, you have to have a learned behavior even though it's not what you want to do. But we didn't get diagnosed officially until he was in high school. It was a nightmare
Mm.
process, like you're saying, a nightmare process. And I looked at the person, I'm like, I don't care what his diagnosis is. I don't care if he's autistic or something else, or I want to be able to give him the best of whatever. I want to know how to parent him better. He's already in high school. Like, what could I be doing differently that would make a significant difference? What could his teachers be doing differently? And fortunately, that was all fine. Um, and the diagnosis gives him the proper services. So insert diagnosis
Yes.
here, right? He needs the services that are right for him. Such a frustrating situation. But when they break it down, like, he'll never be above a 7-year-old. And some things he's like a 2-year-old, like the world revolves around them. That's the me, me, me thing, right?
Yes.
Right. And when you think, okay, he's always going to be an annoying toddler, like his behavior is just, then at least you get it more. You don't have an expectation of a 10-year-old when you're never going to get that. But so challenging. Tell me about your business, because when did you start? Why did you start? And then, because it's virtual, I'm guessing you don't have to live in Sydney to be able to.
Most of my clients aren't even in Australia. The
Right.
majority of my client base is in the US, Canada, UK, and that's deliberate. I work before the kids get up. Like we're recording this at 5 a.m. for me. So I
Yes.
work before my kids get up and I work after my kids go to sleep. So in the morning, I work with the US and Canada. In the evening, I work with the UK. So basically, before I had my children, I worked for like basically customer support in the medical field for like claiming of appointments and different things. It's called like Medicare here.
Yes.
And then I transitioned to a call center. You think people are rude in person, work in a call center, but for the same job.
Yeah.
And when I had my first child, I went back to that. When I had my second child, because my husband was fly in, fly out, when he's away, you're solo parent. You're not a single parent, but you're a solo parent. You do everything.
Yes.
So
Yep.
having one kid in childcare wasn't so bad, but having two, if I get stuck in traffic, because my office was over an hour from where I lived,
Mm.
having somebody who has two spare
Mm.
child seats, because also I don't live in the same state as my family. I had no family support, literally just me. So it was too hard. I did it for like a month or two and I was exhausted. I was cranky and I was just like, I can't do this because yeah. So I decided I would do kind of like a VA thing, more executive assistant because I'm not very
Yep.
tech savvy, but like booking appointments. Because I worked in customer support, I worked in client support for somebody online, and I did that for about a year. And then I was like, I had some experience of coaching, I'd hired a coach and
Hmm.
had some coaching myself. And so I trained in coaching and my business started from there. Originally, I did like weight loss mindset coaching because I used to weigh twice what I do now. And, amongst having two kids with a husband away, I dropped like, what do you guys call it? 78 kilos, 130 150, 170 pounds. I don't know, a lot of weight.
Holy cow. Okay.
So I did that. And but then I realized like I was never interested in what people eat or how they exercise because everyone knows what to do. They just don't do it. Kind of face it. Like, well, not everyone. The vast majority of
Most,
people.
yes,
There is
yes.
a small percentage of people who don't understand the ins and outs of it, but for most of us, we know what to do. We just don't do it in so many areas of our lives. And I believe what happens is all day we give to everyone else. We give to our kids, we give to our colleagues, we give to our partners, we give and we give and we give. We don't take any time for ourselves. Then at the end of the day, when we're exhausted, depleted, we stay up late eating chips and watching Netflix and telling ourselves tomorrow I'll find the right diet. And it's like it doesn't matter what you eat or how you exercise if this pattern has become so ingrained. And the
Right.
work I do with people now is how do you say no to others during the day in little ways and carve out little pockets of time for yourself
Hmm.
so that you don't get depleted and exhausted and stay up late and eating chips and whatever. So like boundaries, and that's the
Yes.
the coaching and the work that I do now.
That's my favorite word, boundaries. I mean, I really feel like we can all set them. I block out 2 days of the week on my calendar to not take appointments. And then unless I want to, right? And it's the unless I want to that screws me every time because I'm like, I will never do a Monday appointment unless I want to. Oh, Suzanne, you want to meet on? Yeah, I can meet on Monday. And right, you can't set the boundary and then ignore the boundary. And so I
Biggest
literally,
boundary checker is ourselves, how
yes.
we override our own boundaries.
So I block out every Monday and I'm like, I write block, do not schedule. Like, you idiot. You need to remember this is blocked out for a reason. It's not blocked out so no one else can make appointments. I'm the one that makes the appointments. But holy
But the
cow.
biggest
I
boundary
mean,
too is with our kids. Like the number of times I've had to let my kids fail at things. And in
yeah,
the back of my mind, I can hear my mum, like, you're the worst mother. A mother should. And I'm like, no, no. I want my kids to fail now when it doesn't matter so they
right.
can learn the consequences. So I remember my daughter coming in at 10 o'clock at night. Like she should have been in bed and I was about to get into bed going, I have this project due. I need to make a diorama. I was like, cool, when? By
Tomorrow.
tomorrow? And I'm like, well, you're going to fail then, aren't you, honey? So, because now, whenever she gets a project, the first thing she does when she comes in the door, here's where it is, here's the due date, then we can map it out or she can prepare for it. But I think sometimes in our effort to help people, like I remember one day I took my son to school and he doesn't think of the basics, and he didn't have his backpack. So I was like, I'm not going home to get it. You can go today without all your stuff. You can ask to borrow. Because you've got to learn the consequences of not taking your stuff. I didn't make the kids starve. Anyone listening, I ordered
Yeah.
lunch from the canteen. As I was there, I was like, gosh, I love this modern convenience. When I was a kid, it was a brown paper bag with a written thing.
Yeah.
Now, so I ordered him lunch. So he had food, but he had no pencils, no anything else. And
Right.
now he never forgot his bag after that. So sometimes we've got to let people
Oh,
go
I
through the
agree.
consequences of their actions.
I agree because everything's about choice and accountability, I think. Like if I choose to block my schedule and then I ignore it, then I have to be accountable for the results of the fact that I feel burnt out and I'm not having enough time to work on my business, right? I mean, there's always a consequence and I agree. Kids need to learn so that they understand. And if we never give them that chance, if we're always saving them, I think it's a huge disservice, but it's also what we do with ourselves. So, I love that
Yes.
you
We let
do.
ourselves, but there's also in the moment, eating chips and watching Netflix and staying up late with no respect for tomorrow is so much sexier than going to bed or maybe doing a little meditation or doing something like, I don't want that. I just want chips. It'll make me feel
Yeah.
better right now. But then I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll feel like crap and my stomach won't be great. And then, so it's kind of like doing it with ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
we have so few capacity left after we've done it for everybody else all day
Hmm.
that it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to parent me. I've parented everybody else. But then where does the thing stop in your life? Like my husband and I, we have one car. He works locally now. And so if he wants to go in the city, he'll have to catch the train. And I drop him at the train station. It's 5 minutes from here. Recently, he said, I'll be back after 5. I was like, okay, cool. Had the kids at school, was recording. And anyway, for whatever reason, I turn my phone over and I have like so many missed calls. So I ring him thinking, oh my God, he's had an accident, he's in hospital, whatever. He's like, where are you? I'm like, what do you mean, where am I? He's like, I'm at the train station. I'm like, it's 2:30. I wasn't looking at my phone. I was working. And when I
Right.
got there, he was all like bent out of shape and whatever. And I was like, dude, You're a grown-ass adult. You could have called a taxi or an Uber or whatever else. You could have got yourself home. This is not my problem. Whereas in the past, they would have been like, maybe I should have been checking my phone. It's like, no, no, I work for myself, but I am working. And you
Right.
said after 5.
Right. I love it. Suzanne, thank you so much for being on and sharing. We have all your information in the show notes. People can find you, they can sign up. I love your story. I love that you shared. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, if you've got any questions, head over to my website, the contact page there, send them through.